Kia ora, and welcome to our overview of the Sector Data Project, which we presented at last year's Water Safety New Zealand Forum. We have been working on the Sector Data Project for a while now, gathering data from our partners and integrating this into insights, which can inform our shared understanding of the drowning problem in New Zealand. We thank Coast Guard New Zealand, Surf Lifesaving New Zealand, the Rescue Coordination Centre, NZ Police, Maritime NZ, Sport NZ, NZ Marine Industry Association, and ACC for allowing us to use their data for this project. Along with fatalities data from Water Safety New Zealand's Drown Base, we have been able to create a contextualised picture of the drowning problem across a number of environments and activities. This presentation addresses 6 myths or assumptions around drownings and water-related injuries. Share data has been used to provide insights only. This presentation doesn't suggest solutions or remedies. Water Safety New Zealand uses the geo-targeting software ArcGIS to illustrate where fatalities have occurred across New Zealand. This is an ArcGIS presentation. Looking at the map of New Zealand, we've coded all fatalities over the last 10 years by their GIS location. 752 drowning fatalities occurred over this period. The rate of fatalities over the past 10 years has plateaued, with an average of 75 per year. The first assumption we're going to look at is that beaches are dangerous. So what does the data tell us about this? In terms of water activities, we'll start with offshore. These represent 18% of all fatalities, and we've pinpointed where these occurred on the map, with fatalities skewed towards the North Island. Comparing offshore between boating and underwater, with blue representing boating and green underwater, the majority of boating fatalities have occurred in the North Island, but underwater is more spread across the country. By relating this fatalities data with Coast Guard data, with the red markers indicating Coast Guard incident locations, we can see a propensity of Coast Guard interventions in the upper North Island. For every 64 Coast Guard interventions, we've had 1 preventable drowning. Now for beaches. These represent 23% of fatalities, and when mapped, we identify a propensity of drownings in the upper North Island. We have also mapped the surf lifesaving patrol areas, and these are identified in yellow. Northland presents a particularly sad picture, and the map indicates there is only 1 surf lifesaving patrol in the area, and this is only during the summer holidays. Operated by the Far North Surf Lifesaving Club, situated at Ahipara Beach. A clear pattern has formed with beach and offshore fatalities being predominantly in the north of the North Island. What's the picture when we look at rivers? With river fatalities, there is no specific regional pattern, with any river or lake presenting a risk of drowning. Also, there are numerous ways people are recreating around rivers and lakes and sadly losing their lives. And whilst all waterways, including beaches, are dangerous, rivers have been identified as the most dangerous of our waterways, representing 24% of all drowning fatalities. With cold water, little signage and no patrols, the water safety sector must address how we can collectively mitigate the risks rivers pose. Rivers clearly are our most dangerous waterways. On to assumption number 2. Swimming is the riskiest activity. We've compared the risk of swimming against the aquatic activities of jet skiing, surfing, fishing, oar and paddle crafting, and boating. Here is a risk graph controlled for swimming using the combined data from Drown Base, severe injury and injury data from ACC, so 3 data sets. Starting with jet skiing, at the top you can see that jet skiing risks are all pointing to the left, which means that swimming is more risky than jet skis in both fatalities and severe injuries. Looking at surfing, with the yellow bar being injuries, the orange bar severe injuries, and the red fatalities, we can see that surfing is riskier than swimming for injuries and severe injuries, but less risky than swimming when it comes to fatalities. Fishing shows a similar pattern to swimming risk. Paddlecraft is less risky than swimming, but the same can't be said for boating. With boating, ACC data indicates a low injury risk, but high risk for severe injuries and fatalities. We can conclude that boating actually poses the highest risk for fatalities, mild and severe injuries, and is a much riskier activity than swimming. This graph compares ACC severe claims for swimming, fishing, boating, and underwater activities. It indicates that the average claim across these four activities ranges between $6,000 and $9,000. These averages seem to have no bearing on the risk factor of each of the activities, as indicated previously, with little difference between swimming, boating, and fishing claims. The result may be a consequence of volume of claims and needs investigating. Predictably, underwater claims are the highest, and while we don't have evidence in this presentation that underwater is a high-risk activity, although this is an assumption we make, this graph does support that assumption, with the average claim being 28% higher than swimming. A lot of people would assume that with age comes wisdom and more sensible behaviour around the water, but does the data reflect this? One way to illustrate this is to look at the results from our latest Attitudes and Behaviour survey, where we asked respondents to self-report on their tendency for risky behaviour while swimming at an unpatrolled beach. We have mapped this out for males and females, and as you can see on the left, our males in blue are showing they are more likely to perform risky behaviour at unpatrolled beaches. The highest is at ages 15 to 24 and then 25 to 34, with risk decreasing significantly for the other age groups. How is age a factor across all aquatic activities? Here we show the risk index by age group, and we can see that the highest risk is the 15 to 24 age group. This is followed by 35 to 54-year-olds and those under 5. Those over 65 years pose less of a risk than the general population, self-report that they don't display risky behaviour, yet we know from current stats that drowning fatalities are increasing with this cohort, a baby boomer phenomena that needs to be addressed in the future perhaps. Here we identify risk by age, broken down by the various activities, with data sourced from DrownBase, surf life-saving incidents, police search and rescues, and ACC claims. For the tables on the right, the darker the red, the more risk, and the darker the green, the less risk. The general pattern across all activities listed is that dark red skews to younger age groups and dark green skews older age groups. When we compare fatalities for boating and swimming, we can see that young people are at risk when swimming, while older people don't present the same risk, and this is reversed for boating. Boating presents less of a risk in the younger age groups and a higher risk in the older age groups. Yet, when looking at the police search and rescue data for non-fatalities, the highest risk is young people in the oar and paddlecraft space, and this is reflected in the ACC claims. Older people are least at risk in the non-fatality space. When focusing on swimming, 35% of swimming fatalities are in the 15 to 24 age group. There's also a pretty clear trend with ACC claims, indicating the problem with swimming is with the younger age groups. Looking at boating participation, fatalities and ACC claims, we see the younger cohort is less affected, with fatalities and claims peaking with the 45 to 54-year-olds and remaining for those over 54 years. Looking at claims alone, compared with participation, we can see that perhaps age does bring wisdom when swimming, with the older cohort least at risk and making the least in ACC claims. This appears to be reversed, however, for boating. Does age bring wisdom? Not when you're a boatie. Whilst this is not necessarily a myth or assumption, we have looked at food gathering practices to understand what may be going wrong or right for people. While we collect data around activities such as fishing, boating, or diving, we don't specifically focus on food gathering practices, so wish to know more. Our analysis has raised questions such as, if you're going out to get food, do you go through a different thought process than if you're just going out on the boat for a bit of fun? For example, if you need to collect kai for dinner or a special event on a specific day, do you ignore the weather conditions and take more risks? We've taken a look at fishing, and this graph shows the NZ population combined with other datasets. As you can see, Māori and Pacific are overrepresented in the fatalities and in police search and rescue data when compared to the general population. One interesting thing to take away is that when you look at ACC claims on the surface, you think it's not quite fitting with the trend. But one thing we know about ACC is that Māori, Pacific, and Asian people are much less likely to access these services, so we can't take ACC claims as a true indicator of injuries by ethnicities. Understanding this context and the context around all of our data sources is really important to ensure we're not misrepresenting information. This graph looks at risk by ethnicity compared to the overall population. People of Asian ethnicity are at a much lower risk compared to Pacific peoples who are most at risk, with inexperience being a contributing factor. We have analysed fishing alone and not wearing a life jacket data against the general population, Māori and Pacific people. Māori and Pacific people fishing alone are underrepresented in police search and rescue incidents, and Pacific people are almost half of the fatality average, indicating that fishing alone is not a high-risk factor for Māori and Pacific people. Not wearing a life jacket is a high-risk factor in preventable drowning fatalities for all ethnicities, and 49% of Māori and 59% of Pacific people rescued were not wearing a life jacket, higher than the average of 38%. Now, what are we doing about tourists? We have analysed fatalities data only to understand more about people from overseas drowning in New Zealand waters. To do this, we have made a comparison of the data between those people who were born in New Zealand, called NZ born. The assumption is that these people have grown up in NZ, attended an NZ school, and have an understanding of NZ water and conditions, compared to people who have come into the country, who we have called other. Other represents just under 20% of all fatalities, with tourists making up only 3% of other. So there's a much bigger picture when you break other down further and consider all the different groups, including immigrants, international students, foreign workers, as well as tourists. Tourist fatalities are predominantly people from Britain or Europe, with a high proportion of Germans, whilst international students are largely Indian or Chinese. So already we have two very different, distinct groups. Both are short-term visitors to NZ, but we can't group them together if we want to understand the behaviour of these groups better. This risk table is based on NZ-born people being in NZ for the full year, or 365 days, whereas tourists are usually here for only 18 days on average. International students are here 6 months on average. So when we take length of stay into consideration, international students are at a much higher risk of drowning than everyone else. Tourists, usually German or British, tend to go to Northland or Otago to do adventure tourism activities. And they're doing it independently, so they're pretty confident in their ability. Experience a wide range of environments, including beaches, rivers, and offshore boating, and are made up of different age groups. International students, on the other hand, are more tightly defined. Aged between 16 to 24 years, are Indian and Chinese, and male. Swimming and accidental immersion events feature highly in their drowning statistics, as do beaches, which for many may be the first time they've actually experienced a beach. Geographically, Auckland is our biggest city for the number of fatalities and incidences and requires specific analysis to understand all of the intricacies of drowning prevention interventions. Auckland also has a very diverse ethnic profile, more so than any other town or city in New Zealand. Comparing Auckland to other NZ locations on a risk index, Auckland is actually low, meaning incidents per 100,000 of the population is low. It is in fact the least riskiest when you look at this risk table, but by proportion of incidents, Auckland statistics are the highest. This map shows Coast Guard, Police Rescue Coordination Centre incidents and drowning fatalities, and identifies surf lifesaving patrol areas. The map indicates a phenomenal number of incidents over the past 10 years. 17 preventable fatalities, 5,846 water-related ACC claims, 595 Coast Guard call-outs, 85 police search and rescue call-outs, and 3 water-related Rescue Coordination Centre search and rescue call-outs. We've analysed ACC claims and drowning fatalities by ethnicity. When analysing ACC claims, New Zealand Europeans are by far the largest claimants. As mentioned earlier, NZ Europeans are far more likely to claim than any other ethnicity. When it comes to fatalities, you can see some more disproportionate numbers between ethnicities. Boating and swimming represent the highest number of incidents in Auckland. Data from Maritime New Zealand indicates a higher than average boatie population among New Zealand Europeans, and this also mirrors ACC claims and fatalities. The NZ Marine Industry Association research into boat trailer registrations is one indicator of numbers of boaties in the region. Over the past 10 years, boat trailer registrations have increased significantly in Auckland compared to the rest of the country, and this leads us to believe that there are more people getting out on the water than ever before. From Maritime New Zealand's 2018 boating survey, we know that 58% of people have less than 5 years boating experience. Thinking about how many people are getting out into the water and how many are new to boating, then it certainly points to a need for organisations like Coast Guard Boating Education and Maritime New Zealand, who run education programs for boaties, to power up and to address this growth. Auckland boaties may think they're fine, but with such growth in this popular pastime and more people on the water with little experience, it is time for the sector to power up to mitigate the potential for risk. The number of fatalities in New Zealand over the past 10 years is 752. Together, we need to keep working smarter to bring this drowning toll down.